Hi, everyone. Welcome to Intro to Azure for the SharePoint developer. My name's David Patrick. I'm a MVP, MCT, MCSD, MIC, KEY, MOUSE. I've got a lot of exam certifications under my belt. Subject matter expert. I work for the U.S. Army. I'm a DoD contractor over at a place called Aberdeen Proving Ground on the east coast of the USA in Maryland, not too far from Washington, D.C. I work for a company called DSA, Data Systems Analyst. I also run a user group called Mad SharePoint. If anyone's interested, Mad SharePoint, it can be found at madsharepoint.com. We're doing virtual user group meetings now monthly. Thanks to our good friend COVID-19, we are now completely virtual. We used to be hybrid face-to-face and somewhat virtual, but now we're completely virtual. Good news is that anyone from anywhere in the world can join us to talk about things like what SharePoint makes them happy about, and sometimes what SharePoint makes them mad about. So what do we want to talk about during this hour that I have you on Learn TV? I want to go over Azure, obviously, but I always like to take a step back and talk at the bigger picture. What is cloud computing? How is it delivered? What are some of the models? What types of services are available? Then we're going to dive into what is Azure, how to get started on it, what types of things can you create, like virtual machines, web apps, databases. How do you manage some of these resources that get created for you? How does it get paid for? Subscription management. How do you find support? And then specifically for the SharePoint developers out there, I want to talk about how you can utilize Azure and some of these virtual machines and other things that you can create to support your efforts in developing solutions for SharePoint. I've been doing this talk for a while now, and what people don't realize is that Azure, it's cloud computing, but it's really great for those SharePoint developers out there, even the ones that are still working on premises. So we're going to go over some of those cool features that Azure enables for us SharePoint developers. All right, so let's jump into it. What is cloud computing? This is the definition from Wikipedia: the practice of using a network of remote servers hosted on the internet to store, manage, and process data rather than a local server or a personal computer. Meaning it's somebody else's computer somewhere, right? This is it's not really a cloud. There's no magic. The funny story I love to tell is that I was doing a talk at a local project manager conference, and one of the project managers, not the pick on project managers, they're great, I love them, but bless his heart, he asked, Dave, is there any hardware in the cloud? And I was like, yeah, it's somebody else's computer. There's absolutely hardware in the cloud. But he had heard of serverless computing and thought that meant that maybe there was no hardware that was required. So it's not really a cloud. That's just the word that we like to use. Cloud computing came about when people were switching from traditional hardware. You had a server in a closet. I literally worked for a company where on the fourth floor in a broom closet, we had computers, and there was there was a box that said SQL Server 1, SQL Server 2, Web Server 1, Web Server 2. And if one of them went down, if the janitor came in and kicked the big orange cord, and the website went down. Then we switched to virtual architecture, where you had machines, but they weren't necessarily designated for a function. We just basically had hosts that were running the hypervisor software. Then on top of that, you had different operating systems that ran different apps. The great thing about virtualization was then if you had 5 or 6 machines and one of them went down, the other machine could automatically pick up the workload and kind of switch your app to one of the available machines. That idea of being able to move your app seamlessly across hardware, giving you that abstraction layer over the hardware, so that when hardware failed, you were able to be much more fault tolerant, gave way to the birth of cloud computing. Because then what people started doing is they started building these big data centers. We actually, the company I was working for many years ago, built our own data center in that, we took the fourth floor over and just built this huge data center with lots of blades for computers. And literally, I could run down the hall here on my skates and pull out a bad blade and put in a new blade, and my website just stayed up and running. So the idea of having a data center now really gave birth to this idea of cloud computing. What you could do is you could invest in all these computers and then make them available to people who needed them, because a lot of times you didn't need all that computing all at once, right? You only needed it during sort of the holiday season, or if you were having a conference, or there was some need for all that computing, but the rest of the time you didn't need it. So a lot of these larger companies like Microsoft said, hey, why don't we rent this out to other folks so that they can use all this computing, and we can all make very efficient use of it. And that's what Microsoft did. They've got over 50 Azure regions now, more than any other cloud provider, and they're all over the world. I heard a story not too long ago about how they sunk one of their data centers off in the ocean to help with, I guess, cooling. So it's really cool. 50 different regions, 54 last I checked. And they're not just, there's some public ones, there's also some that are specific for certain verticals. I work for the Department of Defense, and you'll notice over here, if I zoom into this, that there actually are some regions that are dedicated to the Department of Defense. This is the US DoD East, that's close to where I'm at. There's one down here in Central, one near Virginia, one over here in Arizona. So as a Department of Defense contractor, I can actually access those. It's like a cloud within a cloud that is specific to our needs, and we can create resources just within that cloud. They're not, not available to everyone, but available to that specific audience. In fact, the DoD has its own cloud, separate from Azure. We actually locked ours away in a bunker. It's in a hill down here in an undisclosed location. And in fact, there's several locations. Guarded by guards. This one's a really old picture. You can see that old car in there. It's like from the 50s. But you get the idea, is that we literally took our server center and locked it away behind guards in a bunker, so that we can have our own, what's known as a private cloud. It's just for our resources. But we do couple that with the public cloud from Microsoft and kind of do some hybrid. We'll talk about some of those models in a second here. So this whole idea of cloud computing came about from this generational shift, right? Back in the sort of 50s and 60s and 70s, we had centralized computing. We had thin clients, those dumb green terminals that just was sort of a keyboard and a monitor, which was optimized for efficiency because computers cost a lot of money. Then we started switching to laptops and client server computing and moving power to the person in front of it. But then that had its own issues. It was optimized for computers were cheaper now, so it was optimized for agility. But then you had perpetual licenses and you had constantly updating software. So now we sort of have the best of both worlds. With cloud computing, things are centralized. You can have SharePoint online that you don't have to worry about patching anymore. You can have Office 365 and all that. And you're only paying for what you need. You pay as you go. So cloud computing is really sort of that latest optimization of how to best use computing. Now, when you talk about cloud computing, you really have to think about the 5 essential characteristics of cloud computing. This comes from the NIST definition of cloud computing. The first one I like to talk about is on-demand service. If you're truly using a cloud computing provider, you should be able to go log on to whatever portal they have and say, I need to fire up some resource, whether it's a virtual machine, a SQL server, or a web app, or whatever it is. You should log on in a few minutes, be able to provision that resource and start using that resource. That's one of the big benefits of cloud computing is, hey, this is what I need. And in the past, I'd have to order it. The hardware would come and it would take me hours to set it up and all that. No more. 5, 10, 15 minutes, bam, I've got a SharePoint farm up and running. We'll show you that in a little bit. Another characteristic is ubiquitous network access. So I can access it from anywhere. I can be in Singapore, I can be in Maryland, I can be wherever, and I'm logging onto the portal and provisioning these machines. Doesn't matter where I'm at. Location, transport, resource pooling. This is the idea that it doesn't really matter where I put my resources. They can all work together. So if I fire up a server on the East Coast and I fire up another server on the West Coast, I can kind of have them have each other's back. So if there's a problem with the network on one versus the other, they can be fault tolerant in that sense. Another characteristic is this idea of rapid elasticity. And this is my favorite. This is the one that I think a lot of people don't realize when they get into cloud computing, that this is what really was the impetus behind it all. The idea that I've got a web server, it's up and running. And in fact, a great example that I love to talk about is Outback Steakhouse, and they had a coupon to give away one of their blooming onions. And the first time they did it traditional computing. I think this was the 2009 timeframe. And it was such a hit that the web server crashed. Back in the day when your web server crashed, that was considered success because it was super popular. But the problem was that you couldn't finish what you were trying to do. So Outback Steakhouse then switched to cloud computing, and they were able to then, when more people hit the web service, they fired up another machine, another web server to handle the additional load, and then another one. They scaled out very quickly. They rapidly were elastic. They said, hey, here's more computers to handle the load. And then when the load got less, those computers shut down, so they didn't have to pay for them. So this idea of being rapidly scalable, rapidly scale out to handle the load is a big essential characteristic of cloud computing. And the last one is measured service pay per use. The idea that I only pay for what I'm using. So if I've got 1 week where I'm giving away coupons for free onions, I'll pay for it that week, but not the rest of the year, because I'll fire up those machines. I'm paying for them while they're running. At the end of the week, I turn them all off, and now I'm not paying for them anymore. So very, very efficient use of computing resources by using cloud computing. Now, I talked about the different delivery models. And this is specifically how you would use cloud computing. Do you use it as you're just using the cloud, consuming the cloud? That's considered software as a service. Things like Office 365, Word online, SharePoint online. You're opening up in a browser, no install necessary. You're using the service. Then there's this idea of platform as a service, where you're leveraging the cloud. So maybe I've got SQL Server running, and then I've got a web server that I need to, I'm putting different software up on, and those are working together. So I'm taking the cloud and I'm using different parts of it to create a service, but I've got a little more control. And finally, infrastructure as a service is where you're sort of being the cloud. You're saying, hey, I've got a bunch of different, maybe with our SharePoint farm, I've got several different virtual machines running, but I'm still patching those machines. I've got total control over what version of SharePoint they're running, I can reach into the C drive and do updates. So infrastructure as a service is where you really have that sort of total control. One way I like to think about it is, I'm a big food guy. I love to eat, and think about pizza. So the idea behind on-premises versus infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service is, if you go on premises, you're doing everything. You have total control. If you think about pizza, that means you're setting the table, you're pouring the drinks, you've got to cook the pizza, you've got to make the pizza, you manage everything. Infrastructure service, so you give a little bit of that to the vendor. So now all of a sudden you're taking a pizza from the grocery store and you're baking it. So now the vendor, the grocery store in this case, they've already they made the pizza for us. I don't have to worry about the pizza dough, the sauce, the toppings, the cheese anymore. I still got to set the table, pour the drinks, and bake it. So infrastructure service is giving some of that away. Platform as a service, you give even more away. The idea in the pizza world is that now I've called my local pizza company and they're delivering the pizza. Now I just have to set the table and pour the drinks, because the pizza's showing up hot and ready. And finally, software as a service is where I just went out to eat. Hey, I went to my local pizza chain. They poured the drinks, they set the table. I'm just walking in and handling. And again, this you can see the idea of how much control you pass up, and you pay for that. But again, it's concerns that you no longer have to worry about. And these are all benefits of using cloud computing, how you're going to use it. And then the last thing I alluded to was the different deployment models. I mentioned the DoD has their own cloud in the bunker. That's our private cloud. And then when we use Azure, that's a public cloud. But sometimes we like to use those in conjunction, and that becomes a hybrid situation. So yeah, the two different models: public cloud, private cloud, and then hybrid. Bringing all those together, this is known as the 5-3-2 principle of cloud computing: public and private, software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and then there's 5 characteristics of cloud computing. And there's a little URL, tinyurl.com/aka-ms532, where you can go to get all this information about this, because I think this is a young child from Microsoft first put this out in 2012. And it's a really great intro to cloud computing. If you're a manager, CIO, if you're working for somebody that says, give me the elevator pitch, I always think about the 5-3-2, and I kind of whip this out while we're riding the elevator up. Now it's all virtual, so it's a quick phone call, but I like to give them this kind of rundown for cloud computing. If I think it's nice and short and succinct. So now let's shift our focus to Azure. And Azure, as I mentioned, provides that infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. So in Azure, you can create your own virtual machines. You can create a SQL Server database. You can just use different logic apps and web apps. Office 365 is more focused on just software as a service, SharePoint Online, Word Online, Excel Online. I say mostly. These are not hard and fast definitions. You can query the Graph API in Office 365, and you might say, well, that's not really software as a service, because now I'm kind of doing application programming interface, and that's maybe more platform as a service, So, this is generally how we would describe these services. How do you get started with Azure? Well, there's a couple different ways. So I teach at the University of Maryland, and I'm always encouraging my students to go out there and start learning Azure. They want to learn cloud computing. It's it's all the rage with the kids. And so you can go out there and try Azure for free. As a student, you can go in and sign up for a student account. We'll talk more about that in a minute. What kind of services can you get when you sign up for an Azure account, whether you're a student or you're a professional? You can create your own virtual machines, and we're going to do a demo where we show you how to create a SharePoint farm using 3 virtual machines, an Active Directory server, a SQL server, and a web front end. You can create app services, web apps using .NET, Java, Node, Python, PHP. You can create your own SQL databases so you don't have to install SQL. You just use the SQL, which is really nice. As an ex-SQL DBA, I used to have to constantly keep track of, am I running SQL Server 2007, version 1, version 2, what patch am I on? You can put all that off on Microsoft and just use SQL in the cloud. There's Linux virtual machines, so different flavors of Linux that are available. And then there's that serverless computing that I talked about earlier, functions in the cloud, where it's not that there's no server running your function, but when you create the function, you don't worry about the server. You say, hey, this is the code I want to run, go out and run. I don't care what operating system, I don't care what patch it's on. It's just a function that I want to be able to be run. That's serverless code architecture. So lots of cool types of services. How would you create some of these services? In Azure, they have all these great templates for getting started creating these services. These popular templates like a Windows Server 2016 virtual machine, or a web app, or a SQL database, Cosmos DB, just tons and tons of templates. The templates are really cool because you don't have to go in and create each particular resource that supports a particular, like a virtual machine. When you use these templates, they create all the resources you need. So if you create a Windows Server 2016 virtual machine and it needs an IP address and a network group, a firewall and all that, that gets created all for you by the template. So really, really easy to get started by walking. We're going to walk through some of these templates. You'll see how easy it is. Lots of different services. Obviously, these are some of those resources I mentioned, the Azure DNS, web apps, Azure backup. So lots of different resources. Again, when you use the templates, it'll actually create some of these resources that support whatever you're provisioning. The Azure portal has these things called dashboards that are really, really helpful. Because there's so many resources that you can create, sometimes it makes sense to create dashboards to support whatever project you're working on. And what I like to do is, if I'm doing a demo, or if I'm doing a pilot for something, or a proof of concept, I'll create a dashboard for that particular project. I'll create a SharePoint dashboard, or a HR dashboard, or whoever I'm working for, and then I can pin the resources that are specific to that project or customer on that dashboard. In this example, you'll see you've got some resources here. This is a window to all my resources, and I've got a tile for the service health, a marketplace if I want to peruse other things that I want to add. And you'll see the examples of these dashboards when we get to the demo. So again, how do I get started? You can sign up for a free trial. You can, if you're a student, there's a special student account you can use. There's also MSDN subscription credits. This was one that a lot of people, when I mention it, kind of go, wait, what? Because for a lot of companies, and I've been doing this for over 30 years, at least 5 companies I've worked for, I've gone to and said, hey, do you have any MSDN subscriptions available to assign to me? And usually either through their Microsoft partnership, or software assurance, or through some sort of licensing agreement, they usually have had some sort of MSDN subscription. They're able to say, yeah, here, go use this. So it's a resource that a lot of companies have that they're not even aware of, and not being used. So, certainly, especially if you're working for a large company, and not even that large. I've worked for companies that were, a couple hundred people that have had them. So ask about if your company has an MSDN resource. When you get an MSDN subscription assigned to you, it comes with like $150 of Azure credit per month that you can use. And if you use it up, it just shuts down and it resets the next month. So a great resource for doing development, doing testing, doing training. So students, I mentioned I teach at University of Maryland, they can get $100 credit good for 12 months just by having a .edu email address. You go and you activate. There's this whole frequently asked questions about eligibility. I had my daughter sign up. She went and signed up and said, hey, I want that. You know, she's a student at UMD. And one of the nice things about this, which you see from the screenshots, no credit card required, absolutely free for students. So she went in, she signed up, they gave her these credits. And with those credits, she could go in and she could create virtual machines, web apps, everything that, you know, I can create. She has a special Azure education hub that she was, you know, she was sent to when she signed up, and there's specific learning geared towards her. She was able to download free software. So just a lot of great materials for students to get started, and not just students. If you teach at university, you can sign up for this as well. So any of the education market can sign up, get started with Azure using this offer. It's a really, really great deal. Okay, but you're not a student. That was years ago. You've moved on. For us professionals, there's a resource called Visual Studio Dev Essentials. Free tools, free cloud services, free training, all for free. I'm a big free guy. You can sign up. I've got the links we'll put out later. But when you sign up, you get all these sets of services. You get that Azure trial account, 1 year of free. There's some services, when you configure them in a certain way, will be totally free. There's a virtual machine when it's a certain size, totally free. So there's a bunch of different free resources you can take advantage of that don't even use your credit. Plus, you get $200 of credit for the first month, where you can really try out any of the resources. You get access to Azure DevOps, the Visual Studio App Center, just lots of cool stuff. And this is some of the other stuff that you get when you sign up for the Visual Studio Dev Essentials subscription. Things like 6-month subscription of the Xamarin Controls, Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio Community Edition, just tons and tons. The Power Apps community plan, that's a really cool thing if you're not familiar with that. So you can get started with Power Apps, playing around and learning how to create, you know, low code, no code solutions in the cloud, all available by signing up for the Visual Studio Dev Essentials subscription. And this is me signing up. Now, the one, I'll call it a gotcha. It's not really a gotcha, but the one thing that I did when I signed up for this, because I am a professional, they did use my, they wanted a credit card to identify myself as an adult. I've had this for years, this particular Dev Essentials subscription. They've never charged my credit card, so no fear. It literally is just to identify you. There is no charge. It's still way free. So students versus essentials. Essentials, you get that $200 credit, but for a much shorter period of time. Student, you get less credit, but for all year. There's still always 25 services free. Either one's a great deal. I've signed up for both. Fabulous way to get started on Azure. As I mentioned, you can create different kinds of virtual machines, D1, D2. These are sizes of your virtual machines. If you haven't been in Azure playing around, the bigger, you know, the bigger the number. There's A's and B's and all that other stuff. But the more, you know, more cores, more virtual CPUs that your machine has, the more memory that your machine has, the bigger the disk space that you're allocating, obviously, the more it's going to cost, right? So as I go up the line here, you can see if I want an 8-core machine with 28 gigs of RAM and a 400 gigabyte disk, that's going to be about $1.12 an hour, around $833 a month. What I tell people, especially people who are just getting started and they've got that $150 credit, is you can create machines, you know, but don't create them super big. Create just what you need. You sort of want to size them appropriately, and they will make recommendations when you run through the templates in Azure. It'll recommend certain machine sizes, and you don't have to leave them running all the time. You know, if you're working 9 to 5, get to work, start your machines, play with them a little bit, turn them off when you're done. That way you can really make your credit last all month. And that's what most of my SharePoint developers do. They'll go in there, they'll create a virtual machine, they'll run it for as long as they need. So now we're going to switch, we're going to do a demo. We're going to show you how to create your first virtual machine. And I'm going to use the Microsoft Learn documentation. It's got, if you're not familiar with Microsoft Learn, you should be, you're on Learn TV. But there's just so much great information here. It's way more than documentation. There's quick starts, there's tutorials, there's learning paths. So we're going to use one of their quick starts now, how to create a virtual machine in Azure. And it walks me through. It's about a 2-minute read, takes me about 5 minutes to get through, but it will walk you through step by step how to go into the portal, how to get started, how to create and provision your virtual machine. So this is it. I brought up the Azure Learn tutorial. It tells me to go ahead and open up the Azure portal. So I'll sign in. If I haven't signed up for an account already, I'll go ahead and create my account, but I do have an account, so I'll just log right into that account. Then the next step it walks me through is it says, hey, go under virtual machines and say add a new virtual machine. And you can see here how easy it is. You go in, you just fill in a few details. You say which subscription you're going to use, a resource group that this virtual machine, all the resources that support this virtual machine are going to belong in. Then you give it details like what the name of the virtual machine is going to be, what region. Remember we talked about those 50 regions, what region it's going to live in, what kind of availability, is it going to have any redundancy or not. The interesting thing about the redundancy is a lot of customers, when I show them this, they go, well, yeah, I want lots of redundancy. And then when I do this, they'll see that the price goes up at the end, and they'll go, well, why does it cost more? Because redundancy costs. You're having more computers, obviously the cost is going to go up. That's something that you have to, understand. And when you work with your customers, help them understand that, nothing's free, in the sense that if you're going to have more redundancy, it is going to be a greater cost. Other things you're going to choose is the image, whether or not it wants to be a spot instance. That's a way to save some money. The size, we talked about the different sizes. Finally, you set up an administrator account, username and password, set up some ports to connect to this virtual machine. If you already have an existing license, there's an option to use that. And finally, you provision it. So let's go through this kind of quickly here. I'm going to create a new resource. I'm in the Azure portal, and I'm going to create this new virtual machine to, we'll do a Windows Server 2016, one of the popular ones. I see as I'm doing this that there's a question out there in the chat. Do I need to have programming language as a SharePoint dev? Here's the 3 languages as a SharePoint dev getting started with SharePoint that I would recommend. And this might be surprising. HTML, hypertext markup language, cascading style sheets, CSS, and JavaScript. That you can do so much with customizing SharePoint, and all that translates in when you start working with more advanced tools like the SharePoint framework, or even if you're on premises and you're just doing customization of out-of-the-box forms. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are very, very universal, not just the SharePoint development, but the web development in general. So those are the 3 I would start with. Great question. Another question I saw out there was, is there always free services on Azure? Absolutely. There's 25 always free services, and there's a nice little virtual machine template that you can use that'll help you create a virtual machine that stays under the limits required to have a virtual machine running within those services for free all the time. So I'll put a link out in the chat later to show you that specific template for the always free virtual machine. Great questions. So in this example, I'm walking through and I'm creating this virtual machine, and I'm saying, all right, this, what subscription? I've got a couple different subscriptions. This is my student subscription. These are some of my work subscriptions. So I'll pick whichever one that I want to use the credits at. The resource group, as I mentioned, this is the name of a group that when I create this virtual machine, the IP address, the network security group, all the different resources that support that are going to be put in one group. It makes it really easy for me to manage and see. I can click on that resource group and I'll see everything that supports this virtual machine. Or if it's more than one virtual machine, I can have one resource group with 4 or 5 different virtual machines. Additionally, when I'm done with it, if I want to delete it, it makes it very easy to remove it. I can say this resource group gets removed, and then everything in that resource group will be removed. So it's a nice way to manage my resources. So go ahead and create a new one. We'll call this Azure Global Resource Group. And then down here, we'll give this the virtual machine name. One of the regions, remember we mentioned all those 54 regions. So these are some of the regions. Where do I want to put this? I can put it out over there in Asia, over there in Europe. I'm in the US, so I'm going to put it close by, but you don't have to. You could put it anywhere, right? So we'll go central. So not super close, but nearby. Different availability zones. I'm going to keep this, this is for development. This is for testing. So I'm trying to do it as inexpensive. I want to use my credits as few as possible. So no infrastructure redundancy. What image do I want? A 2016 data center Gen 1 sounds good. If I wanted to switch images, this would be a chance for me to pick a different operating system. Whether I want to save money or not by doing a spot instance, the different sizes, there's that recommendation. It's saying, hey, for this particular operating system, we recommend a D4, which is 4 virtual CPUs, 16 gigabyte of memory. I'll say, yeah, that sounds good. I'll take your recommendation. But sometimes, if I know I need less, I can actually make it smaller. And then, of course, my user account. So we'll set up an admin account here. And this is going to be the account that I use to connect to the machine. I have to follow all the rules. I have to type the name twice. Looks like I did all that. What port? So if this is going to be a web server, I might want to open up HTTP. I might, if I want to secure shell into it, whatever I need. I don't have to make these choices now. I can always, at least if I leave up remote desktop, I can always, or even if I didn't leave that up, I can always go to the Azure portal and make changes later from the overview of the resource. So we'll leave remote desktop up at the moment. Yes, I already have a license. If I didn't, I wouldn't check this off. It saves me a little bit of money. And then I can say next. Now what it's going to do is it's going to give me some other details like, do I want a premium hard disk, or do I want a less premium SSD, or the least premium? And again, when I'm trying to save my credits, I don't really care about performance. I will change that down to the least. This will reduce the cost of the machine running. Encryption, some other options here. So you can go through each of these tabs and choose custom settings, like different names for your subnet or your virtual network. But most of these defaults, the only thing I generally change when I'm just playing around as a developer is usually I just change the disks to save me money. The one thing I might do is under tags, I might add a tag for what this is for Azure Global. I might add a tag, the project that this is for, and just tag it, and that might help me later if I'm looking through my different resources. Oh, will show me everything that's tagged with this certain thing. Once I'm done, I click review and create, and what that will do for me is look through all the settings that I've put through and make sure I haven't missed anything, or if I put any invalid values. So now that I've got all my values in there, you can see it's past validation. It's ready to provision this. I actually have an option to download a template. So if I didn't want to have to fill this template out every time, if I knew I was going to be provisioning this machine, every week for the next year, I could actually download a template with this is the JavaScript object implementation that has all the settings that I chose. There's actually scripts that I can use. It'll give me a PowerShell script, so I can use that in conjunction with the template to automatically deploy it. There's the Azure command line interface that I can use to do that inside the browser. So a lot of cool, different ways to provision this now that I filled out the form. I'm just going to go and use the user interface and say, yep, everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and create that. Now it's going to go out there in Azure and provision that resource. It's going to initialize the deployment. It's going to create the virtual machine. It's going to create the network security group, the IP address, and you can see here some of the details. And it'll take a few minutes. So as it goes through here, you'll see some of those things, some of the resources that pop out and get deployed. While it's doing that, I'll look over here. I see some questions. Are there free virtual machine sizes available? Absolutely. And I'm going to get you a link to the one that I recommend, and I'll put that out there in the chat once I'm done the talk, because it's sometimes not easy to find. You kind of have to search for it. So I'll pull it out and make sure that's out there. So now, as we can see, the deployment is in progress. We've got the VM is created, the network security group, the virtual network, the IP address. So all these different resources are being created inside our Azure Global resource group. So if I click on that resource group, you can see all of the resources that were associated with it, some of the subscription that it's attached to. If I wanted to delete this, I'm not ready to, but this is where if I wanted to delete it, it would say, hey, we'll get rid of all these resources at once. But to be sure, you've got to type the name of the resource group. I'm not going to do that, but this is how I could do that. So it's still deploying. Once it is deployed, I could actually go to the virtual machine, and this is where I would manage the virtual machine. I could, so yeah, it just finished. I clicked a couple different ways you could have went to it. I could also pin this to a dashboard. So maybe we'll create a new dashboard. We'll say this is a shared dashboard. Maybe I'm sharing it with some of my other coworkers, or a private dashboard. It's just mine. I've got a couple different dashboards. I got one for different projects I've worked on. We'll go ahead and put this right on my main SharePoint dashboard. Now I can go to my dashboards, and I should see that new virtual machine pin there. There it is, the Azure virtual machine. Speaking of dashboards, I mentioned it. These are some of the, this particular one has a SharePoint web front end connected to it. It's got a SQL virtual machine, an Active Directory virtual machine, and then all my virtual machines, and then that new one that we just created. Once your virtual machine's provisioned, you can start it if it's not already started. That starts some of the expense associated with a running virtual machine. Some virtual machines, even though they're not started, will still have an expense depending on the storage that you've chosen. But once it's started, I can actually connect to it from the portal. I can use remote desktop to connect to it. And then it's like I'm sitting in front of the actual machine. So if I could download the remote desktop file here, I'll log in with my username and password. It's a brand new machine. So it's saying, hey, do you trust this guy? Yes, I trust. I just created it. I'll tell it what my credentials are. So what I like to do is just use the / because I'm logging into the local machine. So the dot just says, hey, this is the local machine. Otherwise, you know, I'd have to remember the machine name. And then what my password was. And connect. It again warns me, hey, do you trust this? Yes, I said I just created it, so it's mine. I trust it. And then finally, it brings up the remote desktop window. So this is me remote desktoping into that cloud virtual machine, the Windows 2016 data center that I just provisioned. That's pretty quick. Again, back in the day, I'd have to order it. You know, this is before, you know, you had 2-day shipping, and it would take a couple of weeks to arrive and had to install and spend a weekend in putting software. This is, you know, for an old guy like me, this is just amazing to be able to fire up a new server in a matter of minutes and then connect to it and do whatever I need to do. So now I could literally come in here and, you know, set up additional web servers, SQL Server, whatever I need to do, running this virtual machine in the cloud. All right. That was the quick start tutorial. 2 minutes to read, a few minutes to walk through. Really, really great way to get started in Azure. The quick start, again, is meant to be very, very quick. There are tutorials in Azure that take a little bit longer, that are more detailed, that provide you a little more information. So in this example, this is the tutorial to create, manage a Windows VM using PowerShell and not using the user interface. One of the great things about using PowerShell is that there's a what's called a CLI, command line interface, the Azure Cloud Shell available, and it not only is it available from the portal. So if I go back to the portal and show you real quick, I can click this little link here to open up the Cloud Shell. And that allows me to run PowerShell in the browser. Why is that cool? Because sometimes I'm working on a machine where I don't have admin privileges. I can't run PowerShell. Or sometimes I'm on a machine that doesn't have the snap-ins that I need to run PowerShell. But by running this Azure PowerShell in the cloud, it's got everything I need to manage my Azure resources right there in the browser. Don't need to have admin privileges, don't need to install anything. Super, super powerful Cloud Shell in the browser. And the Microsoft Learn shows you how to use that built into some of their tutorials. So as you're walking through one of the tutorials, you'll get a side-by-side. You'll click and you'll say, hey, I want to create a new virtual machine. You click the try it button, and it will, you know, you can paste the command over on the right-hand side and walk through step by step in one of the in a lot of the tutorials. So you know, I know a lot of us have multiple monitors, but if you're at work and you're just trying to do a quick tutorial on your lunch break and you've got one monitor, this is great where you can really walk through the tutorial on one side of your screen and actually run the commands in a Cloud Shell on the other side of the screen. Another really great benefit from Microsoft Learn, using their materials. So let's go and go back there. What other things can you do in Azure? So you can deploy a website using the Azure App Service, another great module in one of the learning paths. This is module 2 from this learning path. Deploy a website to Azure with Azure App Service. So clicking on that takes you to the documentation in Azure Learn. It talks about what you're going to do, how long it's going to take. It's kind of like when my daughter and I looked at this. This is kind of like a college class, right? Each unit takes it's like an individual class, and there's usually 8 units or 16 units that make up like a whole course. Really, you're doing a lot of learning, and there actually are some learning paths that are geared towards exam preparation in Microsoft Learn. So if you're prepping for the Azure 900, fundamentals exam, there's a lot of great material in the Microsoft Learn portal to get you ready for those exams. This one specifically just walks you through creating that web app in the Azure portal. It talks about how you would do it, why you would do it, some of the background between creating a web app, different service plans that you might want. This is what I really want to point out. A lot of the tutorials have what's known as a sandbox. So the sandbox allows you to not use your credit. So if you're out of credit, you used up all your credit that month, you can still do these tutorials by activating the sandbox. The sandbox creates another directory in your Azure portal that is separate from anything else you were working on, and allows you to create resources where you might not have credit or not using your own credit. So I'm telling Microsoft Learn, yes, you can access my Azure account because I want them to create a directory in my Azure account to do this tutorial. So really, really fabulous. Sandboxes are a way. Now you get, I believe, 10 a day. So this is my first one today. So I'll have 9 more I can use today. And they come in different sizes. This one I think might be the 4-hour sandbox. Depending on the tutorial, it might be a 1-hour sandbox. But again, they're free. They don't cost you anything. They show up in your portal once they're provisioned. The downside of the sandbox, besides the fact that they last an hour or last a couple hours, is that once they're done, they do go away, they get thrown away. So anything you create in them will not be saved. So just be aware of that. So this one's creating my sandbox here. And if I switch back to my portal for a second, you'll see that my default directory should now have if I have to refresh this guy, I'll go back to the main page here. Let's close my Cloud Shell. I should have another directory that is my Microsoft Learn. So give it a second, it hasn't quite provisioned yet. I'll come back over here. There it is. So now it's activated. I've used one of my 10 sandboxes today. And if I now go to my portal, I should see that sandbox, the Microsoft Learn sandbox, available to use for this particular tutorial. So as I'm jumping in here, we see if we've got that. There it is. So now you can see I'm in the Microsoft Learn sandbox. So the resources that we see here will be different than the resources when I was in my own directory. Azure has multiple directories. I'm using a concierge subscription. So I don't have any resources yet because I'm in the directory for the sandbox. If I want to switch back later, and this is something that sometimes some people get tripped up on, they'll start a tutorial and they'll go, hey, wait, where's that virtual machine I created earlier? I've lost it. Well, I got to switch back to that other directory, right? So I think I was in my Hotmail directory. Let's see. Let's check this one. I'm logged in with my Hotmail account. I think I was in my DSA directory. So switching back to my DSA directory, there you go. There's some of the resources that I have available to me. So be careful as you play around with these subscriptions and you activate a sandbox, it will switch directories for you in the Azure portal. So just be aware of that no, you haven't lost everything. You just switched directories. What about SharePoint? I've been talking all about Azure and cloud computing, but we're SharePoint developers. We want to create a SharePoint farm in the cloud. A couple different ways you can do it. This is creating a dev test environment, a 2016 dev test environment, the long, hard way. This is an article from TechNet that Keith Mayer put out. He's a Microsoft guy who has done a fantastic job documenting how to build a SharePoint farm, step by excruciating step. Why would you want to do this? Because it's great learning experience. If you're a SharePoint admin or you're aspiring to be a SharePoint admin, you want to know about everything that's involved in how to create a SharePoint environment. This article walks you through, the different machines that need to be created: SQL front end, web front end, Active Directory front end, the different network, the virtual network, and the domain controller that have to be created. And it gives you step by step the PowerShell that you would need. You have to fill in the blanks, like what subscription you're using, in which resource group, what location. But once you fill in the blanks, this does walk you through all the steps to create every resource, and then eventually, yes, it's a lot. I know a lot of my non-coding folks see all that and they go, is there an easier way? There is. I recommend the first way. Go through one time, learn a lot. Then you want a slightly easier way. There is the same article, but this time it's from, there's Keith, the user interface, sort of the GUI, right? And he has the same step-by-step. This is almost the same. This is 2013. But he gives you a nice little article. He has a PDF that walks you through how to go through the portal. And he breaks it down into 5 different exercises. 1, registering your DNS. 2, creating your virtual network. 3, creating an Active Directory. 4, creating the SQL server. And 5, creating the web front end. So a much nicer, it's user interface based, walking through, checking off the different sections, but you're still creating each piece by piece. So still involved, still learning a lot. Again, it comes with the guide and a video, so a little bit better, I think. A lot of my friends, okay. Again, I recommend going through one of those 2 ways so you learn the pieces and parts of getting a SharePoint farm running in Azure. Now, you might be saying, Dave, that's great, but I'm not going to do that every time I need a SharePoint farm. All right, well, I've got for you the easiest way to get started in Azure. And the easiest way to get started in Azure is using their template, right? You can you can create a highly available SharePoint server farm in the cloud in only 8 clicks. What? Yes, the templates. Remember, we talked about all those templates in the past. There's actually templates now for SharePoint 2013, 2016, 2019, and I've never actually counted how many clicks. I click a lot, so I probably use more than 8 clicks, but it's very few clicks to get started with a SharePoint farm in Azure. And let's actually talk about how we do that. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to take a peek over. I see some questions. Someone said, I know virtual machine is a low-level service. Are there any demos on higher level services like app services? So I started to kind of allude to some of the other tutorials. We didn't have time to go through each one of them, but absolutely there are quick starts and tutorials on how to create an app service, a logic app. Yes, and higher level service, absolutely. Another question someone said is, how can I use the Cloud Shell on the go with my phone? Yes, you can. It's funny that you asked that. I actually have tried that. It's hard, but in a pinch, absolutely. There are actually, I've seen some, not just that, but I've also seen some great apps that you can load on your phone to do like lightweight management of your Office 365 tenant or your Azure tenant. So you can kind of like stop and start machines if you forgot to turn off a machine. There are some really cool apps out there that allow you to do that. Good questions. All right, so this is us getting started with an Azure or with a SharePoint farm. You can see here that I've had one that I was running already. This is my SharePoint farm, Active Directory, SQL Server, and web front end. And what this is the resultant 3-server farm you get when you run the template. This is the template. So you go into Azure and you say, I want to do a new SharePoint farm. And there's a couple of options. One is non-high availability. That means no redundancy. That uses the least amount of credits. And then there's high availability, which is double at least your machine, because you're going to have fault tolerance. You're going to have a machine, two web front ends, 2 database servers, at least 2 Active Directories. So for my SharePoint developers, I say go non-high availability. You would probably, most of the times you want to bring up a farm because you want to do a little bit of development. You want to try something, want to try a different web part out. You want to break it or something like that. You don't need high availability. You're going to use up all your credits. Go with non-high availability. So when you use this template, you walk through, much like we walk through with the virtual machine, you specify what your farm name is going to be, what subscription you're going to use. And you can see in this one, we use the Azure for Student subscription. Create a resource group to put all these resources. This template is going to create at least 3 virtual machines, and each virtual machine is going to have an IP address. There's going to be a network security. So there's a lot of different resources that get created. So it's nice to have a resource group where they're all managed together. What location you're going to put it in, and then you choose which storage, what kind of size machine. So before we saw D1, D2, D3. This is just another visual. It's showing you can have locally premium redundant, locally redundant. And again, for my developers, I just look for the lowest cost. This one, that are still recommended and viable, right? I'm not going to run SharePoint on a 2 GB virtual machine. So it has to have enough. Each virtual machine has to have a certain amount of memory. And this one is, different storage accounts for my disks. Once you walk through all that, literally it takes a few minutes, and then you have your SharePoint in the cloud. They give you a nice little DNS address, and it's funny because it's SharePoint on premises, but running in the Azure cloud. And we're actually doing this at the DoD now because we're using our private cloud, and we're sort of in a hybrid fashion. We still want to be able to go and do on-premises type things. We still want to be able to get to the C drive. We might want to turn, we like that kind of control. But by running a SharePoint on-premises farm in the Azure cloud, we still get the benefits of cloud computing. We can turn things off and on. We can scale in and scale out. So it's the best of both worlds. It's a really, really great way to utilize cloud computing, but still kind of maintain a certain level of control over our SharePoint versions. So, so easy a monkey can do it. If you want to do SharePoint 2016 or 2019, there's a couple different ways you can fire these machines up or add them. What I used to do before they had templates out, because this has been around for a while, and the 2013 template was around for a long time. But what I would do is I'd run that 2013 template, and then I would add a new virtual machine and just put it on top of the existing resources. So in this example, I have a SharePoint web front end, an Active Directory, a SQL Server box, the network, the IP addresses. So I would just add another virtual machine, in this example, a 2012 data center, and then I would connect that virtual machine to the existing domain. install SharePoint 2016 on the virtual machine. There was a hiccup where it would say, hey, I'm going to reboot and I can't find F. I ignore that, keep pushing through. It installs. When I get to the farm, I'm not connecting to an existing farm, because what I'm doing is I'm adding a 2016 machine to a virtual machine that happens to be running SQL and a virtual machine that happens to be running Active Directory, but it's a brand new farm. And what I end up doing is I end up having two farms, so a whole new database, or the same database server, but a new database name, a new SharePoint config 2016. And then I have two farms. I've got a 2016 farm, a 2013 farm, using the same SQL server, using the same Active Directory. It's just two web front ends. But it's a great way as a SharePoint developer, because I get asked a lot. The question I get asked is, Dave, why would you want to do this? Because people ask me, does the web, does the chart web part still work in 2016? It's an old web part that ran in 2010. I don't have to guess. I can go fire up a 2016 farm and install it and try it out. I can try it out in 2019. By having these on-premises farms easily available, I can go in there, fire up the farms, and try things in different versions very easily. And let me just show you, before I talk a little bit more about Azure, what that looks like. So again, if I jump back out here to our Azure portal, when you come out here and you create these, when you want to create a SharePoint farm very quickly, you can just come in here, you can type SharePoint, SharePoint, and there you can see 2013, 2016, 2019. So now when you click these templates, you've got all these choices. In 2019, it even gives you more. You've got the small farm with high availability, a single farm, medium farm, just a really great, easy way to get started. Whenever you run through any of these, you end up with, as I mentioned, those minimum 3 machines: an Active Directory machine, a SQL machine, a SharePoint web front end that you can stop. So mine are all stopped, but it's very easy to come in and say, hey, I want to run this. I could have a PowerShell command that just runs and starts all 3. I could go to the user interface and start them all one by one. So there I'm just going to start my Active Directory machine. I go back and start my SQL machine, and then I'll go and start my web front end. And it takes a few minutes for them, just like going, if this was physical, I'd go in there and flip the machines on. That's kind of what I'm doing here. Now they're all running, or they're starting to run, and in a few minutes, my SharePoint server will be up and running. I can connect to it if I want to get to like central admin, or I can just go to the URL and do whatever I need to do. So a huge benefit for SharePoint developers, because you can easily fire, and you have multiple. If I look at all my resources here, you'll see I've got many of these virtual machines. I create, one for HR, one for this encryption web part project. What I'm doing, I'll have different. And another benefit is that I'm not colliding with someone else. So if there's another SharePoint developer, they can have their own SharePoint farm running in their Azure, and we're not bumping heads against each other. So get started with Azure, 12 months for free. Or there's some services that are free. Use the documentation, the quick starts, the tutorials, the learning paths, the exam preps that are available on Microsoft Learn. Just a wealth of information out there. The sandboxes, you can get started. This is one of those exam preps, Azure fundamentals for AZ900 that you can get started with and walk through. You can use those sandboxes to minimize your credit use, to make that last as long as you want. One thing I forgot to mention that is if you do use your credit up, let's look at my subscriptions real quick. So I'll come over here to my subscriptions. No big deal. Even though I put a credit card against this, what happens is when you run out of credit, it just disables your subscription. So here's my Microsoft Partner Network, and you can see that it's been disabled because I used up more. I think I get like $100 and it went up to $145. So all that does is now those resources can't be started. So if I go to that particular subscription and I click on some of those resources, and I try to start one of them and say, you can't start that. I have to wait to the end of the 30 days because my credits last 30 days or roughly 30 days, and then it gets reset. So not a big deal. Don't worry about it if you go in here and you've got a virtual machine. So I got some SQL servers, some function apps. I got all sorts of good stuff in here. All that in this particular subscription is on pause because I used up all my credit. Now there is an option, if your company's willing to pay for it, you can remove that limit, and then I could use this whenever I use up my credit, I just pay for anything extra. But I'm careful with that. I'm a little frugal. Some people call me cheap. So I like to leave my cap on there. And if I use them all up, because I happen to have other subscriptions, I can just switch to another subscription. The last thing I want to mention is that if you want, you should absolutely look into what's called the Microsoft 365 Developer Program. This is a program that gives you a free sandbox, a free Office 365 tenant, SharePoint Online, Word Online, Excel Online, other resources, so you can start building for SharePoint in the cloud. So as a SharePoint developer, it's great that Azure is available and allows me to create these on-premises machines and play around there, but I'm looking towards SharePoint Online. I'm looking to the SharePoint framework and how I can move my resources to the cloud. Joining this program allows me to do that for free. This is not for production. This is for training and test only, but when you sign up for this, it's free. I've had one for about 6 years now. When you sign up, you'll see that it says, oh, Dave, this is available for about 90 days, and then you'll have to be reset. But the truth is, and my screen's acting a little weird, but the truth is that it's more than 90 days, because as long as you're using your developer account, you can you will automatically see down here, it's free 90 days. As long as you're using it, Microsoft will renew it automatically. I get an email every 90 days or so. You've been using your developer account. Good job. We like that you're using it. You're automatically renewed. And literally, I've had one for 6 years that's been renewed every 90 days. Another great benefit of the 365 developer program, besides getting a free SharePoint Online account, is that it allows you to load sample data packs. So you don't have to have a blank slate. You're not staring at, well, this SharePoint is empty. I have no idea what to do with it. You can load your sample data in your new Office 365 tenant, and it'll have fake users and fake data. So you can actually say, oh, okay, this is what an intranet might look like. And let me try moving this there and moving that there. And look, these are different users in different roles. And this is how I might set something up. The sample data packs are incredibly useful. You don't have to load them. So when you join the developer program, there's an option to say, hey, do I want to load the, and you can load the, you don't have to do it right away. You can load the sample data packs later. But I highly recommend taking a look at them, because they sort of fill in the lines. They color the Office 365. It's no longer blank. You can kind of see the vision of how Microsoft was expecting people to use the Office 365 tenant, because you can see the roles of the users and the different, the intranet that was created and the other types of data. So definitely take a look at joining this and loading those data packs. Let's see if this guy, I don't know why he's not coming up, but it's definitely a program to take advantage of. And it's free, so why not, right? It's definitely a great resource to use. So with that, I will wrap it up. I think we have just a couple of minutes as we take any last minute questions. You can find me at Twitter. So I'm at David E. Patrick on Twitter, and I tweet all the time about different talks that I'm giving, different resources I find out about, different community outreach. I do a lot of community outreach with an organization called Tech Girls, where we go out and we do these virtual workshops for young ladies in STEM to get them inspired and interested in STEM. So if you're interested in any of that, follow me on Twitter at David E. Patrick. You'll see lots of my adventures with my daughter, where we go around, doing these workshops and learning about all sorts of new technologies like Microsoft Odoo, which is a gaming design tool from Microsoft, or Visual Studio Code, how we use that in these workshops, or Azure, how we're using that to help our SharePoint developers move from on-premises to the cloud. I appreciate you guys hanging out, spending some time with us. Again, if you didn't think of your question, didn't get your question in now, I'll hang out on the Learn TV, and I'll try to follow up with any additional questions, or you can always find me on Twitter. Again, I'm at David E. Patrick. Tweet me. I love the tweets. I love the tweet back. Follow me. I love the follows. Again, thanks for hanging out, and hopefully you got a nugget or two of information from the talk, learned a thing, or got inspired to go and do more research on Microsoft Learn or Azure. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. Take care. Have a good one.